Thank you very much indeed. Oh, Jesus. Thank you very much indeed, Mike. We better get underway since I've only got 15 minutes. This is what Mike just told you to do about going to the RACP app when it comes up. There we are. Loaded up. I've actually got 6 questions, or when I said that to Louise, she thought I said sex questions. So for the Australians in the audience, I've got 6 questions, and the system for voting we're going to have to get through fairly quickly. So while you're loading that up, let me give you just a brief background on obesity. 2/3 of adults in New Zealand and Australia, and in fact in New Zealand we have more overweight and obese children than you do in Australia. It's a higher burden now than tobacco, very high disparities, difficult to treat, a wicked problem. The context is that there is a reluctance in the political space to take on the opposition, which is the processed food industry. And there is also a reluctance in the health space to start funding a whole lot of clinical measures for obesity, because I think politicians or health ministers see this as a totally open-ended system that's going to require an awful lot of money. So we do have those brakes on the action. Just thinking more broadly about medical associations and their role in epidemics. Most major epidemics that have required a big push politically have had a strong medical basis behind that advocacy, and we need to, I think, lift that up to get through this epidemic. It has been a priority for the Committee of Presidents of Medical Colleges, so at that high level across all medical colleges is seen as a priority. Okay, so let's go to my first, no, it's not my first question yet, just a further bit of background. I am chairing an RACP working party, which is largely made up of New Zealand physicians and paediatricians and public health physicians. We do have a token Australian there, Adrian Bowman. But this is to try to work out what the RAC response is going to be. This document has just been launched for consultation. There are copies of it on the desk out at the front, apparently. I haven't seen one yet. Tell me it's out there for consultation. So appreciate your feedback. And this is the first part of the consultation. So my first question, if you've got your app ready there, is whether you think that obesity should be recognised as a disease. Yes or no opinion. It is actually officially in the ICD codes for a disease as a disease, but the number of organisations are starting to recognise it as a disease. So let's just have your answers on that, yes or no. Give you a couple of seconds. All right, can we see the answers? This is a test of the system. We're going to see the answers. Technician. Yes, all right, that's pretty overwhelming. That's good. Okay, let's go back to the slides. So the value of calling obesity a disease, and this is the terminology that we have in this consultation report. Obesity, especially morbid obesity, is a chronic disease with multiple health consequences. There are quite a few benefits of calling it a disease, taking obesity seriously, helping patients to cope with their obesity and reduced internalized stigma. And to me, that was a bit of a tipping point. I've been a little bit concerned, in fact, and even opposed to calling it a disease, because I don't want obesity to be taken out of the public health space and medicalized. But I think when talking to patients with obesity, they find it useful, help reduce weight bias and obesity treatment. There are some risks. Personally, I think it misplaces the pathology. I think that obesity is a physiological response to an obesogenic environment. The pathology is in the environment. It may over-medicalise it and shift the focus onto individual rather than society solutions. So if we're going to go down this track of calling it a disease, I think we need to keep a focus on these issues at the population level. So in the forthcoming obesity reviews paper, there's an article by George Bray saying obesity is a chronic relapsing progressive disease process, and that's proposed position statement for the World Obesity Federation. Tim Lobstein and myself and others have a response to that, which is just adding a weight of caution around those issues, around there are positive and negative implications, and we need to keep the public health focus high. Okay, so moving on. Just on childhood obesity and around the assessment and confidence, and the question is about if you're operating in this space, how confident are you about accessing, using and interpreting growth charts in relation to defining overweight and obesity for infants to adolescents? So we've got 5 answers there. If you can just click on your app. All right, we're not going to give you too much time. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so most these responses come out rather randomly, I'm afraid. It's a bit of a glitch in the system. So most people don't use it in their clinical practice. Few people underconfident, but most who do use it are reasonably confident. Okay, that's very good. That's helpful. Okay, just go back, thanks. So there is a bit of work around this area of definitions. We have not in Australia and New Zealand moved wholeheartedly to what WHO recommends as definitions. We use weight for height for the 0 to 2s, but New Zealand and Australia use somewhat different definitions for other children and then also for adolescents. So I think there is a role of trying to get some consistent approach, and WHO is the standard making organisation for health, and we should be following WHO recommendations and support it with the resources for diagnosis and so on. Okay, physician education. So how large do you think the gap is in physician education? So I'm talking about the trainees, the training for trainees and continuing professional development on the management of obesity. So this includes addressing weight bias, it should be weight bias, not way bias, discussing the topic with patients, setting expectations and outcomes, appropriate management strategies, and so on. How big is the sort of the education gap, do you think? Okay, give you a second to vote there. Again, these are likely to come out in fairly random order, so it makes it a little bit difficult to read. Okay, let's have a look at the results. A large gap or a very large gap. Okay, so people seem to think that large or very large gap. So that's important actually, because let's just go back to the slides, thanks. I think that's important because this is an important part of the priority setting for the college around where it puts its effort and resources in developing curriculum and CPD. Okay, so given that, this is rather a follow-on question. How high a priority is it to include more education on obesity in RACP training programs and CPD? Recognising that if this is considered a priority, then other things have to drop off as a priority. There's only a fixed amount of resources and effort. Everything can't be a high priority, so given everything else that physicians need to learn about, how high a priority is it? Okay, we'll take a look at the answers, thanks. Got the answers there? Okay, so people feel this should be shifted up the priority stakes, so that's very helpful, and I'm sure will help RACP in juggling its capacity. Okay, back to the slides, thanks. All right, now the second part, so that's the education part. The next part is the advocacy part, which RACP has in its strapline about educate, advocate, and innovate. So how important is it for RACP to invest time and resources, and relatively small resources RACP has, into creating an effective capacity to advocate with other colleges and organisations for more government action on obesity prevention? So this is operating in the public health space as an advocacy organisation. So let's just have your responses on that. Okay, and let's just take a look at the responses. Okay, so it's very important and importance come up there. Okay, so I think that's a vote for moving more into the advocacy space. Let's just go back to the slides, thanks. So just to recognise what that would mean for the college, this is not a trivial jump to move into an effective advocacy space. Effective advocacy happens in coalitions. It's much better if organisations are linked arm to arm in doing it. So this is not just an RACP activity, it's with medical colleges, with other health and consumer organisations as well. But the strong medical voice within that coalition is extraordinarily powerful. And if all the medical colleges are there, then that will really boost the advocacy efforts. The second thing is a common agenda. So having a manifesto of priorities that everybody signs up to, and Jane will talk a bit about that, an activity that's happening in Australia. We don't have anything similar in New Zealand, but you need to get down to some of the nitty-gritty on that. To be a successful advocate, you need to be proactive and responsive, so having agile processes, being able to respond in a very short space of time to stuff that's coming up in the media, activities that coalitions need to respond on. That is not current. I don't think the RACP currently has an agile system for that. It means providing the confidence in people to be able to carry the RACP name as advocates out there. And so it doesn't have to go through this committee and that committee and that committee to get sign-off with an RACP badge. It has to be someone, a person who can speak on behalf of the college, who the coalition organisers can call, get a response very quickly. So would need to think about systems within the RACP for that. Powerful evidence is really important. And this both comes from research, but it also really importantly comes from stories, from the lived experience, from the medical responses, what it's doing to you in your hospitals and your clinics and your waiting rooms, and so on. These stories are what people like me in the public health space can't provide, and so we would be asking people for stories. A high media presence, available expert spokespeople with the human stories. So we would need a network to get out to get those stories. We need both outside and inside activities. So for that I mean we need the outside activities with the public pressure, usually using the media, public pressure for change, for which the medical voice is very powerful. But if we are going to be an effective advocacy coalition, then we also need some inside voices. Who are the people walking the corridors of power, who are rubbing shoulders with the politicians to get these ideas up? So if we can do that, then we have got the inside and the outside, the good cop and the bad cop type of approach. And we need some funding, obviously, for coordination and communications. And I'll just say up there the Mexico example. Mexico has mobilised enormous social change around obesity, and that was stimulated and funded by Bloomberg philanthropies. They injected about $5 million, I think, into Mexico over about 5 years. And they funded the research, they funded the consumer groups, they funded some communications, they funded the groups walking the corridors, and that has created social changes, created a lot of policy wins for Mexico. So if we can mobilise that kind of funding with a big coalition, then I think we're cooking with gas. Okay, so the consultation questions for people in this and for the committees that are looking at this at the moment is whether we want RACP to create an effective advocacy capacity. It might require a different modus operandi and a priority use of RACP resources. And does it want to lead other medical colleges in that? So, last question. How important is it for us, RACP, to invest time and resources in developing innovative health system responses to better manage and prevent obesity? So you people are at the coalface. You're seeing how the health system responds or doesn't respond to people with obesity. How important is it for you to become engaged in influencing and reorienting those health systems? So just give you a minute to vote. It's the last question. Okay, let's have a look at the results. go to the results, thanks. There we go. Very important. Okay, so again, this has got a strong vote. Okay, back to the slides, thanks. So just to conclude, obesity is the biggest and probably wickedest epidemic of the 21st century that we need to deal with. Climate change may overshadow it in the future, but I think what we're dealing with now is the biggest problem. It's got consequences. It's currently filling up our hospitals and waiting rooms, and epidemics need a strong medical response when solutions are opposed by powerful vested interests. Solutions need innovation and evidence creation. And actually that environment affects us. We are part of society. All of us in the room are also struggling with our own energy balance, so we're part of that action as well. Thank you very much.